Hello everyone, and welcome. This podcast series will start with the First Punic War between Carthage and Rome. It will finish with Julius Caesar's nephew, Octavian, becoming Rome's first emperor. Welcome. This is episode 1, The Lion of Lightning. Let me begin by telling you all a story. The story is both historic and filled with legends. This will be the story of a dictator named Caesar. Do not begin with the civil wars, foreign conquests, and famous quotes from Shakespeare. Caesar grew up in a different world. We must not forget that fact. This series will guide you all to see and understand that. We must lay down the foundations for this grand Colosseum. When we get to the famous Roman dictator, you will finally realize why he rolled the dice and overthrew the Roman Republic. We begin on the island of Sicily. This land lays between Italy to the north and Tunisia to the south. This island has hosted many wars from the past. The Greeks and Carthaginians fought long and deadly wars here. They ended up near a deadlock for centuries, with the Greeks located in the east and the Carthaginians to the west. The Greeks come from the dozens of city-states on the island. Think of them like the Vatican, but with separate identities. The Carthaginians, however, came from the nation of Carthage, that has spread across northern African coasts, from Morocco to Libya. They were the city called Messana in northern Sicily. It was recently captured and held by the mercenaries. They were dismissed by the current king of Syracuse, Hiero. Syracuse was a dominant Greek city on Sicily. They asked for both the Romans and the Carthaginians for help. The Carthaginians get there first, and take command of the city. Then the mercenaries freak out over the new rules imposed from Carthage. They, being Italians, secretly allowed the Romans inside the city in a coup d'etat during the late night. The Romans take the city without a fight, and the Carthaginian admiral, who had no orders how to deal with the Romans, because technically they were allies of Carthage, he fled at full speed back to Carthage to report the fall of Messana. This starts the First Punic War between Rome and Carthage. Nearly 17 years later, after the war started, we head into the final play. The once mistress of wealth, Carthage, was on her last batch of gold. She names a new general to the weakened and final army in Sicily. This general was facing against 2 legions of Romans, besieging the last Carthaginian cities at Drepana and Lilybaeum, on the western extremes. Hamilcar Barca, named Lightning because of his speed, he was chosen by the Carthaginian Senate. I wanna be the very best. The last drama of the war happened, when a costly fleet was made in Carthage and set off from the harbor. The fleet was destroyed by the Roman naval commanders off the coast of the Agates Islands, just north of Sicily. After this decisive Roman victory at sea, and the near full collapse of the Carthaginian economy and military, Hamilcar Barca had no choice but to surrender. The Romans placed heavy restrictions on their defeated rival, a large reparation of gold, and the forfeit of all claims on Sicily. Carthage agrees to the treaty. However, Hamilcar is still in Sicily. He is allowed to leave without being de-armed by the Romans. It was an acknowledgement from the Roman generals in Sicily, who fought against the Lightning of Carthage. The armies of Rome and Carthage were vastly different. The Romans used their own citizens to fight, while the Carthaginians hired full mercenary armies, with the generals being of course Carthaginian. So when the Carthaginian Senate recalled Hamilcar's army, payments of gold in full were expected.
Where's my money? You gonna give me my money? Where's my money, man?
Carthage had a long history of dealing with different mercenaries from the African settlements of the Numidians and Libyans, located across from Morocco to Libya, also hiring troops from Greece, Italy, France, and Spain. Hamilcar, as soon as peace was concluded, gave up his command to a junior officer. The mercenaries was grouped separately and then sailed back to Carthage for payment for service. However, the Senate had orders set in place to bring the mercenary army to Sica, about 20 miles west of Carthage. Here they waited for weeks. A few of the mercenary leaders realized that probably no more payments were coming. Then a Carthaginian general rode into camp. The men noticed no carts of gold followed, and were very upset. The general spoke to the many victories of the army their bravery and fortitude to do the right thing. Then the topic came up. Unfortunately, the state could not afford at the moment to pay the fees for the soldiers, and that the men would have to return to the homelands and await payment. As soon as this was spoken, the men took control of the situation. The general was executed immediately. Within the week, a full rebellion was at hand, the Mercenaries' War. The Senate went into full panic and sent a general named Hanno with the remaining lower mercenaries to crush this rabble. With leaders from amongst themselves, the army of rebels challenged General Hanno to battle outside the gates of a major city north of Carthage called Utica. Hanno used his arsenal of 200 war elephants and scattered these mercenaries outside the walls. Later that night, though, most of the mercenaries would regroup in a nearby hill. Hanno was great at organizing an army, but not the best general. He left absolutely no wall defending his camp, because he thought all he needed to do was wrap up the remaining men. So that night, the mercenaries overran Hanno's position. With this defeat and the situation dire, Hamilcar was chosen to assist Hanno with another army and elephants. This back and forth with the Carthaginian and mercenary armies lasted for a couple of years. Then, Utica and the rest of the loyal cities revolted. Now truly isolated and alone, the Romans were forced to aid Carthage. They still had debt to pay to Rome, and if the mercenaries won, then that debt would be lost. Eventually, Hamilcar and Hanno found themselves surrounding the last army of the rebels. With both commanders not really agreeing with each other, they decided that the soldiers should elect one of them to be the Grand Commander. Hamilcar would win this election. He would then trap the rebel army of nearly 50,000 in a canyon. Then, he would starve them into cannibalism and submission. Then he killed about 40,000 of them in that canyon, and the rest was sold into slavery. This was the Battle of the Saw. After the decisive Carthaginian victory, the rebel cities came back over to Carthage. What else were they going to do? Also during the Mercenary War, a pro-Roman party overthrew Carthaginian control over the islands of Corsica and Sardinia, north of Sicily. The Roman Senate refused to accept this at first, but after some time, they decide, we might as well send in troops and occupy. When Carthage protested, the Roman Senate told them, if you want the islands back, then prepare for war, which was impossible at the time. To add insult to injury,
Emotional damage!
Rome added extra money for the peace to be maintained. After the serious war in the homeland, Hamilcar looked not to Africa, but across the Mediterranean Sea to the far outposts in Spain. There were many gold and silver mines. That was where he would go and make the money he needed to pay back the Romans and free his country from their debt. After the Senate approved his proposal to leave with his veteran army, he went to the temple of Baal Haman with his eldest son of 9 years. This was where, on the altar of chief god of Carthage, a boy named Hannibal swore an oath of eternal hatred for the Romans.
Swear to me.
That's a promise.
Then leaving Africa behind, the Barca family, including his wife and sons Hannibal, Hasbel, Mago, and 3 unnamed daughters, after arriving in the trading outpost of Spain near a city called Gades, Hamilcar would gather tens of thousands of eager recruits, bringing his fighting strength to about 50,000 men. He would spend the next several years fighting and expanding Carthaginian control over the Spanish tribes. He even made a new city fortress on the coast called New Carthage. He would set off on a campaign with his teenage sons Hannibal and Hasbel, on a campaign to bring down a rebellious stronghold in the inner depths of Spain. During this expedition, he was betrayed by some of his Spanish allies. With his troops being cut down from all sides, he fell back, but while crossing the river, his sons Hannibal and Hasbel were surrounded, and they were about to be killed. Without a moment's delay, the old lion jumped into the fray one last time. There, in a faraway land, deep in the forest, a man of lion blood died. He fell with many wounds from javelins and swords. He gave his sons enough time to escape with the army. A son-in-law of Hamilcar, named Hasbel the Fair, took over command in Spain for the Carthaginians. The Senate approved this decision, but he would be king in all but name for the next 7 years. He was forced to sign a peace deal with the Roman embassy to mark the Ebro River in Spain as the dividing line between the Roman and Carthaginian influence. He would later be assassinated by an officer.
Long live the king.
Without waiting for the Senate this time, the army in Spain proclaimed Hamilcar Barca, a man who grew up with the army, as the next general. He was only 26 years old. Hannibal quickly looked for a reason to break the peace treaty with Rome. He found it soon after, in a city below the Ebro, who had just signed an alliance with Rome. He would start besieging the city called Saguntum. Soon after, as expected, an embassy of Roman senators arrived at his camp outside the siege works. They questioned him. Why was he attacking an ally of Rome? He just mentioned was in Carthaginian area of influence. The embassy then traveled to Carthage to question them. In the Senate, the Romans simply asked if Hannibal was acting on their orders or his own. After not receiving direct answers, the lead Roman senator told the leaders of the Carthaginian Senate, all misunderstandings can be dealt with quite quickly. He unveiled 2 scrolls. One, he said, was of peace, and the other of war. He asked, which one shall be delivered? The Sophets, the heads of state of Carthage, we do not care which. The Roman responded, then let's have war. Next time, we follow Hannibal as the Second Punic War begins. Thanks for listening and watching. Subscribe for more. This is Son of Prometheus, signing out.
Here I come.
It's showtime.